Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about Lake Lanier. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how is everyone doing tonight? I hope y'all are doing good. And I missed the last week. I had my niece and nephew for a whole week, and we did lots of fun things. We went to the beach a couple of times, the aquarium. We went to like one of those jumping places. We went to the movies to see the new Inside Out 2 movie. It was so funny. So I missed a week, but hopefully y'all checked out the previous episode and my bonus episode that I put out too. I hope y'all enjoyed that. Let me know. But I have a new episode, and tonight I am drinking the last of my Shiner Tex-Hex beer, and I got some new spooky shirts also, so I was really excited about that. I got them yesterday. And so the shirt I'm wearing tonight, it is a Freddy Krueger shirt. I'm super excited about that. And it has like a red border, and it has like Freddy in the shadows. You can't see his face, but you can like see his hat and like some of his scarred face. And then he has his knife hand in front of him. And then at the bottom it says A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I will post a picture of that. And so tonight we will be talking about Lake Lanier. So let's get started. Lake Lanier, the largest lake in Georgia, is one of the deadliest in the U.S. Since its formation, 500 people have died there, nearly 200 since 1994. About 11 million visitors descend upon its shores every year, about the same number that visit the Louvre. But the lake's popularity doesn't explain the high number of fatalities. Lake Allatoona, 40 miles to the west, receives close to the same number of visitors every year, but has only 1/3 of the deaths. Drownings or motor vessel accidents are the usual culprits. There is no upward or downward trend and no way to predict, year after year, how many victims the reservoir will claim. One explanation for the high number of fatalities lies beneath the surface. Debris and rubble from before the lake's construction, as well as everything from sunken boats to lawn chairs to fishing wire, create a treacherous underwater obstacle course. This, coupled with the lake's low visibility, makes rescue operations dangerous. Apart from these reasons for mishaps at Lake Lanier, a more recent death in the lake was due to electrocution. Faulty wiring in the boats and docks or other power-generated systems near the water can cause electric currents to leak into the water. But there's another theory for the body count. Legend has it the ghost of a long-dead woman roams this lake in a flowing blue dress. Mysterious arms reach out for swimmers from the water's depths. Angry spirits call people home to submerged graves. These and other spooky tales in the foothills of the northern Georgia mountains for decades. And given the controversial circumstances surrounding Lake Lanier's construction and a history of racial violence in the ruins of the former town of Oscarville that lie beneath the lake's surface, there might be some truth to this idea. In 1956, the United States Marine Corps of Engineers was tasked with creating a lake to provide water and power to parts of Georgia and help to prevent. They chose to construct the lake near Oscarville in Forsyth County. Named after the poet and Confederate soldier Sidney Lanier, Lake Lanier has 692 miles of shoreline, making it the largest in Georgia, and far, far larger than the town of Oscarville, which The Corps of Engineers forcefully emptied so that the lake could be built. In total, 250 families were displaced. Roughly 50,000 acres of farmland were destroyed, and 20 cemeteries were either relocated or otherwise engulfed by the lake's waters. The town of Oscarville, however, was strangely not demolished before the lake was filled, and its ruins still rest at the bottom of Lake Lanier. Divers have reported finding fully intact streets, walls, and houses, making it the single most dangerous underwater surface in the United States. The flooded structures, coupled with declining water levels, are presumed to be a major factor in the high number of deaths that occur yearly at Lake Lanier, catching swimmers and holding them under or damaging boats with debris. The deaths at Lake Lanier aren't the typical sort, though. While there are many instances of people drowning, there are also reports of boats randomly going up in flames, freak accidents, missing persons, and inexplicable tragedies. Some believe the region's dark past is responsible for these incidents. Legend asserts that the vengeful and restless spirits of those whose graves were flooded, many of whom were black or persecuted and driven out by violent white mobs, are behind the curse. The town of Oscarville was once a bustling, turn-of-the-century community and a beacon for Black culture in the South. At the time, 1,100 Black people owned land and operated businesses in the Forsyth County alone. On September 9, 1912, an 18-year-old white woman named May Crow was raped and murdered near Brown's Bridge on the Chattahoochee River banks, right by Oscarville. According to the Oxford American, May Crow's murder was pinned on 4 young Black people who happened to live in the area nearby. Siblings Oscar and Trucy Jane Daniel, only 18 and 22 respectively, and their 16-year-old cousin Ernest Knox. With them was Robert Big Rob Edwards, 24. Edwards was arrested for Crow's rape and murder and taken to jail in Cumming, Georgia, the seat of Forsyth County. A day later, a white mob invaded Edwards' jail cell. They shot him, dragged him through the streets outside the courthouse. A month later, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel appeared in court for the rape and murder of May Crow. They were found guilty by the jury in just over an hour. Some 5,000 people gathered to watch the teenagers be hanged. Trucy Daniels' charges were dismissed, but it's widely believed that all 3 boys were innocent of the crimes. The most popular legend surrounding Lake Lanier is called the Lady of the Lake. In April of 1958, Delia Mae Parker Young was purportedly traveling with Susie Roberts to the Three Gables, a local roadhouse in Dawsonville, Georgia. Susie was driving her 1954 Ford across the Lanier Bridge when, for some unknown reason, she lost control of the car, crashing off the right abutment of the bridge. Divers entered the lake and searched the area, but neither the vehicle nor any remains were discovered. The physical evidence of the occurrence was a set of skid marks suggesting that the women's car went into the lake. Then, a year later, in 1959, a fisherman discovered human remains that had floated to the surface of the lake. Further examination yielded no obvious cause of death, and the individual could not be positively identified, although the body was noted for missing both hands and several toes. Many assumed that these were the remains of either Delia or Susie, but at the time it was impossible to know for sure. 31 years passed before Susie Roberts' 1954 Ford was finally found, when in November of 1990, the lake bed was dredged in preparation to set the foundation for pillars of a new bridge. Unexpectedly, the shell of a rusted-out car was discovered with human remains still behind the wheel. Through the personal belongings found in the car, a purse, rings, and a watch, Susie Roberts was able to be identified, and in light of this discovery, it was concluded that the young woman found decades before was in fact Delia Mae Parker Young. For 3 decades, Susie Roberts was trapped in her car, hidden under 90-plus feet of water, having come to a rest on a steep slope, stuck within the tree trunks, mud, and other debris that make up the bed of Lake Lanier. But now she could finally be properly laid to rest. It is this tragedy that has been the foundation of the most persistent legends associated with Lake Lanier. The apparition of a young woman in a blue dress that has purportedly been seen time and time again walking up and down the length of the Lanier Bridge, and, according to those who have seen the spirit, who has become known as the Lady of Lake Lanier, she is, in fact, missing her hands. Another of the numerous apparitions to purportedly haunt Lake Lanier is that of a mysterious raft seen floating on the lake late at night. Its inhabitant, a shadowy figure pushing along with a pole, a lantern lighting his way. Those who have made claims to have seen this nautical apparition say it seems to appear and disappear from out of nowhere. One such sighting has been reported by 2 fishermen who claimed to have seen it at about 1 a.m. on a cold autumn night. The raft was spotted in a section of the lake that is known to be roughly 45 feet deep. Yet the raft's rider seemed to have no difficulty navigating the water with a pole to push him along. The 2 fishermen watched as the figure traveled along, suddenly shouting and jumping from the raft into the freezing water. Afraid something was coming for them, the fishermen quickly pulled up their lines and prepared to leave the area. But when they shined their lights across the water, there was no sign of the raft or the figure. The dark surface of the lake was calm and undisturbed, as if nothing large had ever disrupted them. Those who believe this tale to be true believe the mysterious figure was in fact an echo of the past, when men once traveled the shallow rivers and creeks among the foothills of northern Georgia that have since been consumed by Lake Lanier. Besides these ghost stories of yore, there are those who claim that the lake is haunted by the spirits of the 27 victims who have died in Lake Lanier over the years, but whose bodies were never found. In the end, though, ghost stories are perhaps nothing more than a fun way to write off an otherwise tragic history littered with racist violence as well as unsafe and poorly planned construction. Regardless of its size, for 700 people to have died in the lake in less than 70 years, something must be wrong. The Army Corps of Engineers initially believed that the submerged town of Oscarville wouldn't cause any harm, but the lake also wasn't constructed to be recreational. It was meant to supply water from the Chattahoochee River to towns and cities in Georgia. Many of the deaths can likely be attributed to things as simple as not wearing a life jacket, drinking alcohol while out on the lake, accidents, or incorrectly assuming that the shallow water is always safe. Perhaps the only thing that truly haunts Lake Lanier is its bigoted history. Now I will be talking about a supposed encounter on Lake Lanier. This is titled, "The Time I Almost Drowned." If you live in Georgia like I do, you've probably heard of Lake Lanier. It's the biggest lake in the state, and it is about 45 minutes from my house. So I go there about a time or two during the summer. Not the actual lake park, but the water park. What's wrong with the lake? Well, I'm glad you asked. Lake Lanier is known throughout Georgia and the other southern states as being extremely, and by extremely, I mean extremely haunted. Back in the 1950s, the government needed a new water source since their old one, the Chattahoochee River, was becoming too small. So they took the town in the north called Lanier and created a government order to turn the town into a federal lake for the small river. They didn't warn the people. One day, they opened up the levee protecting the town from flooding during the spring and summer when it rains a lot. About 20 people died that day. You can look up Lake Lanier Scary on YouTube and a shitload of scary videos pop up on the history. And the most disturbing part? People go and explore the deep and videotape it. Baby dolls are still left in the houses, cars still left, everything frozen in time. When you go to the lake part of Lake Lanier, it feels like a pool when you swim far enough. You can't touch the ground. People have drowned on the lake with nothing there. Someone even drove into the lake by accident. I don't know if they lived or died, but I'm going to assume they died. Even Usher's kid died there. No one starts to drown at that lake and lives. Well, except for me. One night, while I was swimming in the lake, my aunt, uncle, and dad were up at the campsite. I started to swim to the inner part of the lake, the park where all the rotting buildings are and cars underwater. I was playing by myself when I felt a pull. Something was tugging my leg. It wasn't a seaweed-like plant that grew there. It felt like a hand. Two, to be exact. I started to scream and struggle to stay on top. I was too far out for anyone to hear me. I was only 7, but my swimming was pretty strong for a 7-year-old. I started trying to kick the thing that was underneath me, trying, but to no avail. I gave up. I let it take me underwater. I started to drown. When I felt something pull my arms and pull me up, I was back to shore somehow, and I started to cough, and I looked up at the man. He looked like a kindly African-American person. He wore a hat with no shirt on and swimming trunks. The only problem, my family and I were the only ones camping since it was a Sunday night and I didn't have school the next day. I thanked the man and coughed up the water. He said it was no problem and started to walk to the campsite. I followed him and asked my dad and uncle, who were making hot dogs on the grill. "That man saved my life," I told them, and they looked at me like I had 2 heads. "Lydia, what man?" my dad asked, confused, and I stopped. "The man that just saved my life and walked up to the campsite. He was—" I looked, and he was gone. I told them what happened, and they looked spooked. My skin was still cold from the water and oxygen or lack thereof. I went to sleep that night and had a dream, a very odd and off one. The dream consisted of a man, a wife, and their little one. It looked like it was a while ago since the lake looked so small. The wife, the husband, and the little girl got into a decent-sized motorboat and sped off. After a few moments of them driving through the water, they started to sink for no reason. They weren't wearing life jackets, and when the boat went down, they started to drown, specifically the little girl. The dad starts to swim down for his daughter, unable to save her. He screams, "Lydia!" My heart stopped. That was my name. I continued to watch, my breath being taken from my body. The wife shortly after starts to drown due to her being tired. The husband starts to cry and eventually lets the lake take him. I woke up with a startle and started to cry. The man was trying to prevent me from the same fate. I haven't forgotten about that day, and to this day, I refuse to go into the water that isn't a pool, specifically lakes and the ocean. Every time I go, I see the man watching me, making sure I don't drown. I find it comforting, really. He was protecting me. Every time I see him, I know I'm safe. I know that I won't be hurt, and nothing like that has happened since. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.